No ship entered the Varkesh sector and lived. That wasn't superstition. It wasn't rumor whispered by frightened traders or exaggerated in war academies. It was recorded fact, centuries of data, lost fleets, vanished expeditions, entire armadas reduced to silence without a single distress call. The Varkesh sector wasn't just dangerous. It was final. So when a signal appeared inside it, the Imperial command deck didn't react at first. They froze. Rows of officers stared at their consoles, as if refusing to acknowledge what they were seeing would somehow make it disappear. The vast observation window ahead showed nothing but darkness, an endless stretch of dead space where even starlight seemed hesitant to exist. "Run that again," Commander Threx said quietly. His voice cut through the silence, sharp and controlled, but the tension beneath it was unmistakable. The junior scanning officer swallowed hard, his fingers trembling as they moved across the console. "Rerunning sweep, sir." The holographic display flickered, once, twice, then stabilized. The signal remained. Steady, consistent, real. "It's not interference," the officer whispered. "It's broadcasting." A ripple of unease spread across the deck. "From inside the sector?" someone asked. "Yes. That's not possible." "It's happening." Threx stepped forward, his boots echoing faintly against the polished metal floor. His four eyes locked onto the projection, studying it with a predator's intensity. "Source. Unknown, no transponder signature, no registered identification." "Then identify it manually," Threx snapped. "Magnify." The hologram zoomed in slowly. At first it was just distortion, static, fragmented light struggling to form a coherent image. Then, piece by piece, a shape began to emerge. A ship. Long, angular, scarred. It looked like it had been through hell, and kept going anyway. The hull was blackened in places, metal warped and uneven, as if it had survived pressures no structure should endure. Deep gouges ran along its surface, not clean cuts from energy weapons, but jagged marks, almost like something had torn into it. And yet, it was moving. Not drifting, not broken. Moving with purpose. A cold silence settled over the deck. "That's a warship," one officer murmured. "No," another said softly. "That's something that refused to die." Threx didn't respond. His gaze had fixed on something else. Symbols carved directly into the hull. Not standard markings, not identification codes. Tallies. Hundreds of them, no, thousands. Each one etched deep, deliberate, permanent. A record of something. Victories, survival, loss. Before he could speak, the ship's signal spiked. "Commander, it's transmitting." Every screen on the deck flickered, as the signal forced its way through Imperial systems without permission, without protocol. "Block it," someone shouted. "We can't, it's bypassing." Static exploded through the speakers, loud, violent. Then, silence, and a voice. Human. Low, steady, controlled in a way that made it far more unsettling than any threat. "This is Captain Elias Vance of the Warship Resolute." No distortion, no fear. Just clarity. Threx felt something tighten in his chest. Humans. That word alone carried weight, history soaked in conflict, exile, and unfinished consequences. They had been driven out, scattered beyond known space, abandoned to regions no species dared explore. They were supposed to be gone, extinct or close enough to it. And yet this voice, it didn't sound like extinction. It sounded like certainty. The transmission continued. "We are not here to negotiate." A pause followed, not technical, not accidental. Intentional. As if the speaker wanted every being listening to fully understand what that meant. Then the signal cut. Just like that. The deck remained frozen. No one moved, no one spoke. It felt as though the entire ship had stopped breathing. Threx slowly exhaled. "Track its trajectory," he ordered. The navigation officer hesitated. "Sir, you should see this." The display shifted, plotting the warship's path. A straight line. No evasive pattern, no hesitation. directly toward Imperial space. Toward them, Threx's jaw tightened. Speed, constant but increasing. Interception window. The officer's voice faltered. There isn't one. Threx turned sharply. Explain. It's not trying to avoid us, Commander, the officer said, eyes wide. It's not even adjusting course. A heavy silence fell again. Because now, it made sense. The scars, the tallies, the message. This wasn't a lost ship trying to survive. This wasn't a desperate attempt at contact. This wasn't even an invasion. Threx stared at the approaching vessel, something cold settling deep within him. No, he whispered. Around him, the officers waited, uneasy, confused, afraid. Threx's voice dropped, barely audible. It's coming back. And for the first time since the signal appeared, Commander Threx felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Not doubt, not uncertainty. Fear. The Imperial High Council chamber had stood unchanged for over 1,000 cycles, an unshakable symbol of order, dominance, and absolute control. No voice had ever risen in panic within its walls. Until now, they should not exist. The words slammed across the chamber like a weapon. Councillor Vyrex's tendrils lashed violently, striking the polished floor as his voice cracked with disbelief. Humans were exiled beyond charted space, he continued, turning sharply toward the central projection. Driven into regions even we deemed uninhabitable, no supply lines, no support, no future. Not exterminated, another councillor corrected quietly. Vyrex snapped toward him, functionally the same. Clearly not. The chamber dimmed as the central hologram activated, revealing the scarred silhouette of the human warship. It rotated slowly in midair, every burn mark and fracture illuminated in chilling detail. At the far end of the chamber, the Emperor sat motionless on his elevated throne, his gaze fixed on the projection. Unlike the others, he didn't shout, didn't react outwardly. But the stillness itself carried weight. Commander Threx stepped forward into the center of the room. This vessel emerged from the Varkesh sector, he said, confirmed by 3 independent scans. A wave of murmurs followed immediately. That's impossible. No known material can withstand that region. No known species can survive it. Humans are known anymore, Threx interrupted. That silenced them. The Emperor leaned forward slightly. Explain. Threx gestured toward the projection. The image zoomed in, focusing on the hull of the warship. Initial analysis shows extreme structural damage, thermal scarring, gravitational distortion, unknown biological residue. Biological, someone whispered. Threx didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed to the markings etched across the ship's surface. Thousands of lines, deep, uneven. Permanent. What are those? The Emperor asked. Not decoration, Threx replied. They were carved, not manufactured. Then what do they represent? A pause. Threx chose his words carefully. Survival, he said. Each mark likely indicates an encounter, a battle, a victory. The chamber fell quiet again. Victories, Councillor Vyrex scoffed. Against what? There's nothing in that sector but stellar decay and gravitational collapse. Threx's gaze hardened. Then something else is there now. The words settled heavily. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. Zoom further. The hologram obeyed, magnifying the hull until even the smallest details became visible. And then, they saw it. Between the tally marks, beneath the scorched metal. Claw-like impressions. Not weapon strikes. Not energy burns. Physical, violent. As if something had gripped the ship and tried to tear it apart. A councillor recoiled. That's not possible. Those aren't from any Imperial arsenal. Another added, voice tightening. No, Threx agreed quietly. Then what made them? No one answered. Because no one had an answer they were willing to say out loud. The Emperor broke the silence. You said the vessel transmitted. Threx nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. Repeat it. The chamber darkened further as the audio replayed. "This is Captain Elias Vance of the Warship Resolute." The human voice echoed across the vast hall, calm, unwavering. Several counselors shifted uneasily. There was something unsettling about it, not aggression, not desperation. Confidence, absolute and unshaken. "We are not here to negotiate." The message ended. Silence followed. The Emperor remained still for a long moment. Then, they issue a declaration without terms. "Yes," Threx said. "No demands, no negotiation, no attempt at diplomacy." "Yes." The Emperor leaned back slowly, his expression darkening. "That is not how a weakened species behaves." Threx's voice lowered. "No, it is." A counselor spoke, quieter now. "If they survived exile, perhaps they've come to reclaim territory." Another shook their head. "With a single ship against an empire." Threx looked back at the projection, the damaged warship still advancing without hesitation. "They didn't send one ship," he said. The chamber stilled again. "They sent a message," he continued. The Emperor's gaze sharpened, meaning. Threx met his eyes. "This vessel isn't here to win a war." A beat passed. "It's here to prove something." "And what would that be?" the Emperor asked. Threx hesitated. Because even as he spoke, part of him resisted the conclusion. But the evidence, the sector, the scars, the voice, it crossed a region that destroys everything we understand, Threx said slowly. It survived what should be impossible. And now it approaches us without fear. The Emperor's fingers tightened against the armrest. "Finish your thought, Commander." Threx's voice dropped. "If one human ship can do that." Another pause. "Longer this time." "Heavy fleets follow strength," the Emperor said quietly. "Yes," Threx replied. The chamber felt colder somehow. "Then where is the rest of them?" a counselor whispered. Threx didn't answer. Because deep down, he already knew. And that realization was far more terrifying than anything they had seen so far. The warship wasn't alone. It never had been. They just hadn't seen the others yet. The Imperial blockade formed like a scar across space. Hundreds of warships, cruisers, destroyers, carriers, aligned in precise formation at the edge of the Varkesh approach corridor. Their weapons were charged, their shields synchronized, their crews locked into combat readiness so strict it bordered on ritual. Nothing crossed this line. Not without permission. Not without annihilation. Commander Threx stood on the flagship bridge, watching the approaching contact on the forward display. The human warship, Resolute, was no longer a distant signal. It was visible now, real and terrifyingly persistent. Still moving forward. Still alone. "Range?" Threx asked. "Closing fast," the tactical officer replied. "No change in trajectory. No evasive maneuvers." "None." Threx's eyes narrowed. "They see us." "Yes, sir." "Then why aren't they reacting?" No one answered. Because there was no tactical logic for it. A lone damaged ship approaching a full Imperial fleet should have been desperate, erratic, searching for escape. Instead, it was steady, deliberate, almost patient. On the forward screen, the human vessel grew larger. Its scars were more visible now, deep fractures across the hull, sections sealed with mismatched plating, energy scars that still glowed faintly like old wounds refusing to close. And yet it moved like nothing was wrong. "Fleet weapons ready," Threx ordered. The Emperor's voice came through the command channel. "Do not engage until my order." "Yes, Your Majesty." A pause. Then, "Unless it fires first." Threx didn't like the implication, but he acknowledged it. The distance closed further. 50,000 kilometers, the sensor officer announced. 40, 30, still no response from the human ship. Then, a signal spike. "Commander, energy surge detected." The entire bridge tensed. "From the target," Threx demanded. Yes, but not weapon systems. It's passive. Define passive. The officer hesitated. We don't know what it is. That was worse. The Resolute began to glow faintly along its damaged hull, not from weapon charging, but from something internal, like heat spreading through veins. Then came the transmission. No warning, no distortion. Just clarity. You are blocking the corridor. Captain Elias Vance's voice again, calm, controlled. But this time sharper. More present. Threx stepped closer to the console. They're addressing the entire fleet. The Emperor's voice cut in. Respond. Threx hesitated, then opened the channel. This is Commander Threx of the Imperial Armada. You are entering restricted territory. Identify your intent. A pause. Then Vance replied. We already did. Static flickered. Threx frowned. They transmitted once before. That was not an identification. The reply came instantly. It was a warning. Silence spread across the bridge. The human ship was now within engagement range. Every weapon in the Imperial blockade locked onto it simultaneously. Thousands of targeting systems converged on a single scarred vessel. Fire control ready, the tactical officer whispered. Threx stared at the approaching ship. Something about it felt wrong, not technologically wrong, but conceptually. Like it wasn't behaving as a target was supposed to behave. Commander, the Emperor's voice returned, colder now, give the order. Threx opened his mouth and stopped because the Resolute was accelerating. Not retreating, not slowing. Accelerating forward. Straight into the heart of the blockade. Sir, impact trajectory confirmed. Evasive pattern 0. It's coming directly at us. Panic flickered across the bridge. Threx's instincts screamed at him. No ship did this. No commander chose this unless they were suicidal or insane. Or certain. Hold fire, he ordered sharply. Commander, hold fire. The fleet waited. The human ship closed the distance at impossible speed. Then, Vance's voice returned again. Quieter this time. Almost final. You built your empire on the assumption that nothing could survive where you exiled us. The ship's hull began to glow brighter. Not from weapons. From stress, from strain, from something deeper. You were wronged. The Resolute crossed the last threshold. 10,000 kilometers. 5. 1. And still accelerating. Threx's eyes widened. It's not trying to avoid collision. The Emperor leaned forward. Threx finished the thought, voice barely audible. It's testing how close we'll let it get before we break. The tactical officer screamed, weapons online, target locked. Threx snapped hold. Too late. The first Imperial ship fired. Then another. Then the entire blockade erupted in light. Energy beams converged on the human warship as it pierced the formation like a blade through cloth. A flash of destruction engulfed it. For a heartbeat, nothing was visible. Target destroyed, someone whispered hopefully. Threx didn't answer. Because he knew. He had seen enough already. The smoke cleared, and the Resolute was still moving. Burning, breaking apart at the edges, but still moving. And now it was inside the fleet. Threx felt something cold settle into his chest. This isn't a charge, he whispered. The Emperor's voice was tight now. Then what is it? Threx watched as the human ship pushed deeper into the blockade, unhindered by fire, undeterred by destruction. His answer came slowly, almost unwillingly. It's a statement. And somewhere inside that broken warship, Captain Elias Vance spoke again. Only this time, the entire Imperial fleet heard him clearly. Now you understand. The next moment, the first Imperial cruiser vanished. The Imperial blockade didn't break, it fractured. Where there had been disciplined formation, there was now chaos. Warships shifted too fast, too violently, as commanders tried to react to something that refused to behave like a normal target. The human vessel, Resolute, was inside the formation now, moving through it like a wound reopening across reality. "Regroup, regroup," Threx shouted. But the fleet wasn't listening anymore. Because something impossible had just happened. The flagship of Sector Command fired its primary weapon. A beam of concentrated stellar annihilation, designed to erase planetary crusts in seconds, lanced through space and struck the human warship dead center. The impact lit up the void in blinding white, sensors overloaded, visual feeds scrambled. For a moment, even command systems struggled to interpret what they were seeing. "Direct hit confirmed," the weapons officer yelled. "Structural integrity should be." Then he stopped, because the light didn't fade normally. It bent, curved around something invisible, and returned. "What is that?" someone whispered. The beam didn't scatter, it didn't explode, it recoiled, like reality itself had rejected the attack and sent it back. A second later, an Imperial cruiser on the far side of the formation disappeared in silence. Not destroyed, not vaporized. Unmade. The ship didn't even have time to broadcast an emergency signal. One moment it existed, the next it didn't. A void where matter used to be. The bridge erupted into panic. Recalibrate targeting. It's reflecting energy signatures. That's impossible. Nothing reflects a phase-locked stellar beam. Threx stood frozen, staring at the aftermath. "That wasn't reflection," he said slowly. The Emperor's voice cut through the channel tighter now. "Explain." Threx swallowed once. "It didn't bounce the energy back," he said. "It redirected it, like it was never ours to begin with." Silence. Then another explosion, this time closer. Another cruiser gone, another gap in the formation. The Resolute wasn't firing. It didn't need to. Everything it passed simply failed. Systems malfunctioned. Shields collapsed. Weapons misfired. Entire ships lost synchronization as if something about the human vessel was rewriting the rules they depended on. "Commander," a sensor officer shouted, "it's broadcasting again." "Cut it off," Threx snapped. "We can't, this isn't a transmission we're receiving. It's infecting our comm network." Static flooded every channel, then a voice returned. "Captain Elias Vance." But this time there was no calm restraint. "Only wait. Only history. You built weapons assuming the universe would always behave predictably." A pause. The human ship moved again, deeper into the fleet, untouched despite everything firing at it. "We stopped assuming that a long time ago." Another Imperial cruiser shattered, not by impact, not by energy, but by structural collapse, as if its internal systems had simply forgotten how to hold themselves together. Threx's breathing slowed. "This isn't combat anymore," he said quietly. The Emperor replied instantly, "Then what is it?" Threx watched the Resolute glide through destruction like it was walking through smoke. His answer came reluctantly. "It's correction." A tactical officer spun toward him. "Sir, we're losing fleet cohesion. The ships near it are destabilizing." "Pull them back." "We can't. Navigation systems are." The officer's voice cut off as another nearby ship vanished. No explosion, no debris. Just absence. The Resolute passed through the center of the blockade now, and reality around it began to feel thinner, unstable, as if the laws that held matter together were struggling to remain consistent. Then Vance spoke again. "You asked why we are here." The human ship slowed, for the first time since entering the engagement zone. It stopped, right in the middle of the Imperial fleet. Surrounded, targeted, still intact. "We are not here to conquer you." A pause. Every weapon in the fleet remained locked. Nobody fired, nobody dared breathe. Threx's voice was barely audible. "Then why?" Captain Vance answered, and the entire fleet heard it. "We are here to remind you what survives when everything else stops making sense." The Resolute emitted a low pulse. Not energy, not sound. Something deeper. And in that instant, the second Imperial cruiser vanished. But this time, it wasn't alone. The silence after the disappearance lasted less than a second, but it felt like an eternity stretched thin across the void. Where the Imperial cruisers had been, there was now nothing. No wreckage, no escape pods, no energy residue, just empty space, as if the universe itself had decided those ships were never written into existence. "Report," Threx snapped. No answer came immediately. Not because no one was trying, but because systems were failing too fast to interpret anything coherent. "Fleet status," the Emperor demanded through the channel, voice sharp now, controlled but no longer calm. A tactical officer swallowed hard. "We've lost 2 cruisers and partial systems across 11 more ships. Sensor interference is spreading outward from the target." "Interference? It's not electronic, Your Majesty," Threx said slowly. "It's conceptual." That word hung in the air like a crack forming in reality. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Threx didn't take his gaze off the central display. The Resolute still sat in the heart of the formation, damaged, scarred, impossibly intact. Around it, Imperial ships were shifting, drifting, destabilizing as if they were losing their grip on coordinated reality itself. "It's as if the presence of that vessel is altering how our systems interpret structure," Threx said. "Our targeting solutions are becoming unreliable. Our spatial maps are inconsistent." A pause. Then another cruiser vanished. No explosion, no warning. Just absence again. A sensor officer screamed, "It's spreading." "What is spreading?" the Emperor demanded. The officer hesitated. "Whatever it is, it's not staying localized. It's propagating through fleet-wide synchronization links." Threx's jaw tightened. "Cut intership comms now." "They're already severing themselves automatically," the officer replied. "It's like they're rejecting contact." The Emperor leaned forward slightly. "And the human ship?" Threx looked at it. For the first time, something had changed. The Resolute was no longer simply advancing or surviving. It was anchored, still in the center of chaos, but no longer moving. And something was happening around it. Space itself was thickening, like pressure building in a sealed chamber. Then, the void answered. Not through speakers, not through sensors, but through perception itself. Every mind on the bridge felt it at once. A low, impossible sensation like the universe inhaling. A second presence. Larger, older, deeper. "Commander," a junior officer whispered, backing away from his console, "do you feel that?" Threx didn't answer because he did. And it wasn't coming from the Imperial fleet. It was coming from beyond it. The Varkesh sector. The darkness behind them. The place no ship returned from. Something inside it was reacting. Responding. The Emperor stood slowly. "What is happening?" Threx's voice dropped to almost nothing. "We woke something up." Another cruiser vanished. Then another. But this time it wasn't random. It was directional. Every disappearance traced a pattern, moving away from the human ship toward the outer edges of the fleet, toward the Varkesh boundary itself. "Containment formation," Threx ordered. "Reinforce outer perimeter." "We can't," the tactical officer shouted. "Ships are refusing alignment. Navigation systems are rerouting themselves." "Rerouting where?" The officer looked up pale. "Away from it." The human vessel remained still, silent, watching. Then Captain Elias Vance's voice returned again. But this time, it carried something different. Not command, not warning. Recognition. "You brought weapons into a place that does not obey them." A pause. The Resolute's hull dimmed slightly, as if conserving something unseen. "And now it is responding the only way it knows how." Threx frowned. "Responding to what?" he muttered. The answer came, not from Vance, but from the void itself. A distant ripple across sensors. A gravitational distortion pattern that didn't match anything in Imperial records. Something was moving inside the Varkesh sector. Something vast. Something waking up properly now. "Commander," a sensor operator shouted. "Mass emergence detected. Multiple signatures, no hundreds, no thousands." Threx stepped closer. "Location." The officer's voice shook. Inside the sector and expanding outward. The Emperor's expression finally changed. Show me. The display updated, and the Imperial command deck went utterly silent. The darkness of the Varkesh sector was no longer empty. It was filled. Shapes, movements, structures that defied classification, too large, too fluid, too coordinated to be natural phenomena. And they were coming closer. Not toward the Imperial fleet. Not toward the human ship. But toward the boundary between them. Threx's voice turned hollow. They weren't the only ones surviving in there. The Emperor whispered, almost to himself. What did we exile into? The Resolute's signal flickered one last time. Captain Vance spoke quietly. Now you understand why we didn't come alone. The void surged, and the first shape crossed the boundary. The first thing the Imperial fleet noticed wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a weapon discharge. It was silence. A silence so complete that every sensor across the blockade struggled to interpret it as a valid state of existence. The void beyond the fleet, once empty, predictable, mapped, was now saturated with impossible structure. Shapes moved where no shapes should exist. Masses drifted without gravitational explanation. And at the center of it all, the Varkesh sector was no longer a boundary of darkness. It was opening. Report, Threx snapped. His voice sounded distant even to himself. The tactical officer stared at the display, face drained of color. Multiple emergent entities confirmed, size variable, composition unknown. Define unknown, the Emperor ordered sharply. The officer hesitated. They don't match any known matter classification. They're not solid, not plasma, not energy in a stable form. They're structured uncertainty. That's not a category, a counselor muttered. It is now, Threx said quietly. The Imperial fleet held position, but only barely. Formation discipline was collapsing, not because of enemy fire, but because instruments could no longer agree on where anything actually was. Then it appeared. Not on sensors first. Not on visual feed. But in perception. A vast structure emerging from the Varkesh darkness, like something surfacing from beneath reality itself. It did not move through space. Space moved around it. Magnify, Threx ordered. The image sharpened, and the entire bridge collectively went still. The structure wasn't a ship. It wasn't a station. It wasn't even mechanical in any meaningful sense. It looked grown. Organic but not biological. Constructed but not engineered. Vast layers of interlocking geometry pulsed faintly, as if the thing was thinking in dimensions beyond comprehension. And embedded within it, smaller shapes. Ships. Human ships. Not just the Resolute. Dozens, hundreds, thousands. All scarred, all altered, all part of the larger structure now. The Emperor stepped forward slowly. They became part of it. Threx shook his head faintly. No, he said, they didn't join it. A pause. They were absorbed by it. The Emperor turned sharply, meaning. Threx didn't answer immediately, because the implication was worse than anything they had prepared for. The structure pulsed again, and a voice returned. Not from a ship, not from a transmitter, but from everywhere at once. We did not survive the Varkesh sector. Captain Elias Vance's voice, but different now. Layered, echoed, no longer a single individual speaking. We adapted to it. The Imperial fleet remained frozen, weapons locked, shields active, but none of it mattered anymore. Because nothing they were prepared for applied anymore. The structure shifted slightly, and the Varkesh darkness behind it seemed to respond, like an ocean reacting to movement beneath its surface. You sent us into a place where physics stops being a law and becomes a suggestion. A pause. We accepted the rewrite. Threx whispered they changed. The Emperor's voice was quieter now. Changed into what? The answer came instantly. The structure expanded, revealing deeper layers. Within it, human vessels could be seen dissolving, not destroyed, but integrated. their hulls becoming part of the greater whole, their systems no longer functioning independently but contributing to something larger. Something alive. Something coordinated. Something aware. We stopped being singular, the voice continued. Because singular things do not survive where everything is connected. A sensor officer suddenly shouted, "Fleet integrity failing, our formation algorithms are breaking down." "Why?" Threx demanded. The officer stared at the console in disbelief. "It's learning us." Silence fell again. Then another realization hit the bridge like a physical weight. The structure wasn't just existing near them. It was analyzing them. Every movement of the Imperial fleet, every attempt at coordination, every defensive pattern, it was all being observed, recorded, understood. And mirrored. Threx felt his throat tighten. It's studying our fleet behavior. The Emperor's expression darkened, to counter it. Threx shook his head slowly. "No. A pause. To understand how we break." The void shifted again. And this time smaller shapes emerged from the larger structure. Not warships, not weapons. Probes. Dozens of them. Each one moving with unsettling precision toward the Imperial blockade. No aggression. No haste. Just certainty. Captain Vance spoke one final time, but now his voice carried something almost like calm resolution. "You asked why we returned." A pause. The probes advanced. "We did not come back to conquer." Another pause. Closer now. "We came back to ensure nothing like the Varkesh sector is ever created again." Threx's eyes widened slightly. "They're not attacking us," he whispered. The Emperor turned slowly toward him. "Then what are they doing?" Threx stared at the approaching probes, at the expanding structure, at the rewriting of everything they understood. And finally, he understood the shape of it. His voice dropped. "They're judging whether we belong in a universe that still makes sense." The first probe crossed the blockade boundary. And reality flinched. The moment the probe crossed the blockade boundary, every Imperial system screamed at once. Not metaphorically, not as a warning tone. As a collapse of certainty. Navigation maps distorted. Weapon locks failed. Shield matrices fluctuated between active and non-existent states. Entire warships reported conflicting positions, existing in multiple locations at once or none at all. "Stabilize the fleet," Threx shouted. "I can't," a tactical officer yelled back. "Targeting systems are refusing fixed coordinates." The Emperor stood rigid. "What is it doing?" Threx didn't answer immediately, because the answer was unfolding in real time, and it was worse than anything he had prepared for. The probe didn't attack. It didn't even scan in a traditional sense. It simply observed. And in doing so, it forced everything around it to be observed back. Space stopped behaving consistently. A nearby cruiser flickered in and out of visibility like a failing memory. Its hull appeared fractured across multiple overlapping realities, each slightly different version of itself failing in different ways. Then, it vanished. No explosion, no energy discharge. Just absence again. Threx's voice dropped. "It's not destroying ships." The Emperor turned sharply. "Then what is it doing?" Threx stared at the expanding presence of the Varkesh-born structure. The human-machine hybrid entity that had once been a warship, now a distributed intelligence spanning impossibly large space. His answer came slowly. "It's correcting inconsistencies." A counselor snapped. "That doesn't mean anything." "It does now," Threx replied quietly. Another probe crossed the boundary, then another. Each one triggered the same effect, not destruction in the traditional sense, but resolution. Systems that contradicted each other failed. Fleets that relied on unstable synchronization collapsed. Ships that existed in paradoxical states simply ceased to be valid configurations of reality. The Imperial formation, once a symbol of absolute control, began to dissolve under its own contradictions. Fleet cohesion at 40%. 30. Shields misaligned across sectors. Communications are looping. Messages are returning altered. The Emperor's voice hardened. Countermeasures. We have none, the tactical officer snapped, panic breaking protocol. There is nothing to target. It isn't a weapon system, it's a process. Threx watched as another cruiser faded out of existence mid-transmission. Then another. He clenched his fists. It's evaluating us, he said. The Emperor narrowed his eyes. Evaluating. Yes, Threx said. Not as enemies, not as targets. A pause. As outcomes. The bridge went silent. Even the alarms seemed to hesitate, as if unsure whether they still applied. Outside the viewport, the Varkesh structure expanded further into Imperial space. Its presence no longer felt like invasion. It felt like exposure, like something long hidden being brought into direct comparison with something far older, far more stable. And the results were not favorable. Captain Elias Vance's voice returned again, but this time it was softer, almost distant. You built an empire on control. A pause. We learned what exists beyond control. The probe spread through the fleet now, moving without urgency. Wherever they passed, Imperial systems either stabilized or collapsed completely. There was no middle state. Threx realized something cold and sharp. It's not destroying everything, he said quietly. The Emperor turned. It's separating what can exist from what cannot. A counselor shook his head. That's impossible. Civilization doesn't work like that. Threx looked at him. It does when the rules change. Another cruiser disappeared. This time the fleet didn't even react. They were losing the ability to predict loss itself. The Emperor's voice lowered. And what determines that separation? Threx stared at the central structure, the amalgamation of human survival, Varkesh adaptation, and something deeper that had no classification in Imperial science. Then he saw it. Patterns, consistency, stability under contradiction, the ability to persist where logic failed. His voice dropped. Survivability beyond comprehension thresholds. The Emperor went still, meaning. Threx didn't hesitate this time. If something cannot survive contact with them. A pause. It is removed from the equation. Silence stretched across the bridge like a held breath. Then the Emperor asked the question no one wanted to hear. Are we surviving? Threx looked at the fleet, at the flickering ships, at the collapsing formations, at reality itself bending to accommodate something it had never been asked to host before. And for the first time since the Varkesh signal appeared, Commander Threx had no calculation to rely on. Only observation. Only truth. Not all of us, he said quietly. Outside, the structure pulsed once more. And in that pulse, the Imperial fleet understood something it had never been forced to understand before. This was not war. This was not conquest. This was not even punishment. It was selection. And the next phase was already beginning. The Imperial fleet did not explode. It did not surrender. It did not retreat in any meaningful sense. It simply stopped being a single, coherent thing. Where once there had been hundreds of coordinated warships enforcing the edge of known space, now there were fragments, some stable, some flickering, some no longer aligning with any recognizable version of reality. The Varkesh-born structure had passed through them like a tide that didn't destroy the shore, but redefined what counted as land. Commander Threx stood on the bridge of what remained of the flagship. The room was quieter now, not peaceful, just emptied. Half the consoles were dark. Several crew stations existed only as faint holographic afterimages, flickering in and out as if unsure whether they were still required. The Emperor's presence still lingered on the command channel, but even that felt distant now. Less like authority, more like memory. Fleet status, Threx said softly. A junior officer checked the console, then hesitated. 23% structural coherence remaining across all registered vessels, he said. But coherence is unstable. It keeps changing. Changing how? The officer swallowed. Some ships are reporting they never engaged at all. Others report they were destroyed before contact. A few, he paused. A few are reporting the fleet already left the sector. Threx closed his eyes briefly. The structure beyond the viewport was still there. Still vast. Still alive in a way that made the word alive feel insufficient. It no longer advanced. It no longer pressed forward like an invading force. Instead, it had expanded into something broader, like a system completing a calculation and now holding the result in place. And within it, the human vessels remained, not separate but integrated, not prisoners, not pilots, something closer to components of a larger understanding. Captain Elias Vance's voice returned one final time. But it no longer came through channels. It came directly into perception, shared across every surviving Imperial mind simultaneously. It is done. A pause. Not threatening, not triumphant. Final. You are no longer in contact with the Varkesh anomaly. Threx's eyes opened slowly. The Emperor's voice, weaker now, responded through the fatting link. Define anomaly. Vance replied, a region of reality where survival overrides structure. Another pause. You attempted to expand into it. It responded. Silence followed, not because no one had questions, but because questions no longer felt like they belonged to this version of reality. Threx stepped closer to the viewport. The Varkesh structure was beginning to recede, not retreating but withdrawing attention, like a mind turning away after finishing a calculation. And as it did, something unexpected happened. Ships that had been flickering stabilized. Systems that had been collapsing realigned. Even the fractured cruisers that still existed in partial states began to resolve into singular outcomes, some surviving, some vanishing, all settling into definitive states at last. Reality was reasserting itself. But not as it had been. Something had changed. Forever. The Emperor spoke quietly. Are we spared? Threx didn't answer immediately. He watched as the human-integrated structure slowly drifted back toward the Varkesh sector, its edges dissolving into darkness again. No, he said finally. A pause. We were evaluated. The Emperor's voice tightened, and Threx looked at the stars beyond, the same stars that had existed before the Empire, before the fleets, before the war. Now they felt older, more honest, and we were not worth continued correction. The Emperor said nothing, because there was nothing left in the system to argue against that conclusion. Moments passed, or didn't. Time was no longer entirely reliable in the way it had been before. Then the Emperor spoke again. What happens now? Threx watched the last traces of the Varkesh structure fade into deep space, taking with it the impossible mathematics that had briefly rewritten their understanding of existence. He thought for a long moment, then answered simply, We remember. A final transmission arrived, not from Vance, not from any vessel, but from the fatting echo of the structure itself. Not a warning, not a command, a statement. Do not attempt to define what survives beyond your laws. A pause. Only observe it. Then silence. The Varkesh sector closed again. Not sealed, not guarded. Just no longer paying attention. The Imperial fleet, what remained of it, drifted in the aftermath like scattered thoughts after a dream that was too large to fully retain. Commander Threx remained at the viewport for a long time, watching empty space, until one of the junior officers finally asked, quietly, Commander, did we win? Threx didn't look away from the stars, because somewhere in those stars now lived a truth that no empire, no fleet, no civilization had been